Good evening, everybody. So tonight, it is my great pleasure to introduce Eugenia Bone, cook, writer, and amateur mycologist. I've been a fan of Eugenia's work for many, many years, ever since reading Mycophilia, a book which illuminated some of the corners in this endlessly vast, endlessly quirky, and endlessly fascinating subject we call mycology. It was the catalyst for my own journey into this pastime, and I'd recommend it to anyone with an interest in this subject matter, which is, of course, everyone who is on this call. It's much more likely, though, that you recognize Eugenia for her work on the film Fantastic Fungi, where her cameos were, in my opinion, some of the most engaging segments of that wonderful film. In Eugenia's latest project, she has been busy developing all manner of scrumptious recipes for the soon-to-be released Fantastic Fungi Community Cookbook, the subject of tonight's talk, and just in time for Morel Season 2. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Eugenia Bone and Bon Appetit.
That was really sweet of you. I'm so pleased to be here tonight with all of you. So I wanted to. I usually like to dedicate this talk anyway. Hold on one second. I'm going to move this out of the way. To my husband Kevin, because he continues to do a phenomenal amount of dishes every day and has for months and months and months. And he's also seems to be okay with eating mushrooms every day for months and months. So first, I thought I'd just introduce myself a little bit and my cooking background. I grew up on a kind of hobby farm in Westchester County, where my dad, who is an artist, actually is still alive. He's 90, almost 95, and he still, has his own garden and has chickens for, chicken meats. And when I was young, rabbits and squab, ducks, the works. He made his own wine, and then he was on the kind of the campus making his art. This is something that I included because I was just over at his house in Westchester, and he was showing me this notebook that he's working on. And he started making these drawings right after the election. And, there's there's like hundreds of these, page after page of all of these kind of cowering people in flames and stuff like that. And lately, it was presentient in a way. And then lately it's like these images have gotten a little more smoky. And now, there's some that have little bits of like dried flowers and greenery and stuff. So, he's truly an artist and expressing his time. He also wrote about food. He wrote this book, which for some people was seminal, certainly for me. This is me in the back. That's me right there. This is at our kitchen table. And he was, in the early 70s and late 60s, he was good buddies with a group of people, of chefs that kind of circulated around Craig Claiborne, who was at the time the food editor for the New York Times. And most of these chefs, they were mostly Italian. Well, my dad was Italian, but the rest of the chefs were like French. They were all men, almost all men. And they were like working class guys. This was before the day of the sort of celebrity chef. And they would do potlucks at each other's houses. And so when the chefs would go to Katona, where my parents lived, I was the eldest child who knew where stuff was. So I learned a lot by being like the little kitchen helper for those chefs over the years. So that really was like how I kind of got started. For family we're Italian American, so family recreation, we didn't really ski or sail or anything like that. What we did is we hunted for food. We had a little cottage in Provincetown on Cape Cod, and that's where we would do things like seine for whitebait, or some people call them spurling, which are fantastic little minnows that you seine for at high tide. And then we can fry them whole. And it was Pierre Fernet who said, oh yeah, you put it in an omelet. It's like, wow, that was a revelation. So they're really good in an omelet. We also would hunt for these moon snails, which at low tide, you follow their trail. It was like almost like a mole trail, and we'd follow it in the sand. And then when we get to the end where the snail was hiding, we would dip our toes underneath the snail, and its giant foot would cover our big toes. It was like my early sensual experiences, was hunting for these marvelous snails. And then we hunted for mushrooms. Although there weren't a whole lot around us, but there were morels, and we found them under dying apple trees and in the Westchester area. And then as I grew older, I got into other kinds of hunting. I particularly loved to hunt ducks. Um, uh, anyway, I've been a wild food enthusiast really my whole life. And I've written a number of cookbooks and contributed to many food magazines, especially Sever magazine, um, and nominated for awards and all that stuff. And as Tom kindly mentioned, I've also written some pop science, including mycophilia. So Louis Schwartzberg, the director of the Fantastic Fungi movie, read mycophilia, and he and I started like phone conversations where we just talk about mushrooms and our mutual interests and things like that. And that's how I ended up being in his, having these cameos in his movie. Um, it's kind of interesting. Oh, by the way, these are like my two favorite cookbooks I've done so far. Um, uh, anyway, so to me, it's interesting the way Fantastic Fungi kind of got out there into the public, because Louis self-distributed that movie. It's sort of like self-publishing a book. But as a result, like the approach he took to self-distribution was, he developed these kind of tight relationships with different theater houses, small places, encouraging people to tell each other about the film. And he really built a community that ended up being just very fond of the film. So that was a couple of years ago. Last, I guess it was around this time, well, more like early summer last year, Louis contacted me. He said, I'd really like to do a Fantastic Fungi cookbook. And I was like, I don't know, there's like lots of mushroom cookbooks out there that are awesome. And I was just kind of skeptical about a Eugenia Bone mushroom cookbook. I mean, I didn't want one. So so I was just kind of hemmed and hawed, and then it hit me. Why not do a community cookbook? I mean, he's been building that community for 2 years. And I love community cookbooks. I love the authenticity of the recipes. I love the way they reflect a group of people and often a place and a regionality. I like the unpretentiousness of a community cookbooks, and I'm always getting really great recipes that I'll use forever in them. So I thought, wow, we could do something like that, drawing from the community that Louis has built as a result of representing his film himself, of self-distributing. And what's more, it worked conceptually with the movie, because for Louis, mycelium is a metaphor for collective action, for how everything in nature does better when we are connected and we help each other. When organisms whether it's a forest ecosystem or in a society, when we're connected, we do better. So I told him, well, let's try that. He loved the idea. So we just determined that, how are we going to get the recipes? That was a little problem. So we thought, all right, let's do a website where people can upload their recipes. They can share recipes with each other. We'll maintain it. We'll try to make it as nice as possible and as easy to use as possible. And that's just a function of the kind of community stuff that Louis is into. And if we get enough recipes, okay, then we can do a book. We can do a collection from the website. And then while Louis and I are talking back and forth on the phone about all this, I emailing, I started to notice that there was this company, Magical Threads, that were on the, on the chains. And it turns out that Magical Threads are they do like the web stuff for Louis. They do a lot of branding kind of stuff for him. And they're super sweet people. I have to say, everybody I've dealt with through Louis Schwartzberg has been so sweet and laid back. It's just from this New Yorker, it's a little bit of a shock. It's really great. So I worked with them to build the website, and we had various challenges to think through, like the format, now how the recipes were going to look. Are we going to do complex recipes? Are we going to do simple recipes? Now these discussions with really just started in mid-July with Magical Threads when we were building the website. So it wasn't that long ago. We had to develop the recipe guidelines. And so I had to really think through what it takes to build a recipe that someone who doesn't know how to write a recipe could actually portray their experience in a way that would succeed for the user, for the reader. So, we had to work through a lot of kind of quirky things. We had this very complex situation for a while where you could choose between 3 recipe styles. One was a method, like say if you wanted to do a mushroom ketchup and there's no, it's just one paragraph. And then we had a simple recipe, which is just ingredients and instructions. And then we had complex recipe, which would be like a quiche with pastry and a filling, a crust and a filling. And it just got really bogged down. So we ended up just doing a simple recipe and seeing what happened. Then, I wanted there to be a list of mushrooms so we could do so that the users could put in morels and find all the morel recipes on the website. But I was also a little worried, because I didn't want people to make any mistakes about mushrooms or put up recipes for mushrooms that might need sort of some special handling in order to be safe. And my knowledge, is limited. So I reached out to these folks, Ryan and Emily at a mushroom, the Mushroom Hunting Foundation. So they're on the East Coast, and they're really good with knowing all the caveats of wild edibles. And then David Campbell on the West Coast, who's also super, super knowledgeable. So when I'd encounter something that, like for example, Inkies, which I actually haven't, but if somebody put up a recipe for Inkies, I could just double check with them, okay, we've got to do like some kind of editor's note about, drinking booze with your Inky cap pasta. At first, there was some resistance against using the Latin binomials from the Magical Threads folks. I mean, they didn't, how it is. A lot of people who don't know mushrooms or aren't like totally into mushrooms don't, they see the Latin binomials as like a kind of insurmountable mountain. And I understand that because I've felt that myself, but it's really, really important if you're going to be advising people to eat certain mushrooms. And I was also kind of worried about, trolls, people doing tricky things like putting up a recipe for I don't know, Amanita phalloides or Morel carpaccio or something. So all the recipes come to my email, and I read every one. And if I'm unsure, I talk to these people for help. But I check everyone to make sure there's no trouble. And there really hasn't been any mischief. People have been just marvelous and open-hearted and not tried to cause any trouble. I mean, the oddest thing that happened is, it happens periodically. We get a recipe for how to prepare psilocybe mushrooms for consumption, psilocybe tea, and so on. So I was also, I guess I could say even mainly worried about getting enough mushrooms to test the recipes. I mean, the truth is New York is pretty provincial when it comes to wild mushroom retail. So I went on a hunting rampage, mainly with these two guys from the New York Club. This is Charles Luce and Paul Sadowski. And they were great guys to hunt with. They had huge knowledge, and we picked lots and lots of different wild mushrooms, which I froze up to have on hand in case of testing. And, hunting with them was just so divine. They took that chicken off that tree. It must have taken them 25 minutes. It was like they were dermatologists removing a mole. I mean, so carefully and so respectfully did they remove that chicken. I still have some in my freezer. In fact, I just tested a fried chicken mushroom dish from the website with this very chicken that you're looking at. I started to, at this time, so we're still talking about like September. The website's up, and I'm worrying about mushrooms, and also about my knowledge in general. So I started to kind of up my game. I had long conversations with people like Eleanor Shavit. That's her right there, Eleanor, in front of her like pony kegs of mushrooms. This is her mushroom pantry. I mean, 3 words to describe that pantry. Oh my God, there are so many mushrooms in it. I also talked to Chad Hyatt, who's a wonderful mushroom hunter and chef. In fact, I have his book up here. I don't know if you can see, you can see me, but it's called The Mushroom Hunter's Kitchen. Oh, here we go, Mushroom Hunter's Kitchen. It's he's fantastic, super knowledgeable. He helped me a lot. And Alan Burgo was someone else who I spoke to. He's got a website called foragerchef.com. He's really knowledgeable about cooking techniques. And I learned a lot from these folks and others, basic things that were important for me to keep in mind during testing. Like I learned that you don't need fat to cook mushrooms, but fat is very helpful to flavor mushrooms. Certainly they can be cooked dry or braised in water and then finished in fat. I learned that mushrooms retain their shape even when cooked super hard. So I didn't have to worry about squishy mushrooms. I learned that there is like totally it's a total non-controversy when it comes to washing mushrooms. If washing mushrooms was going to be a problem for the mushroom, can you imagine what would happen when it rained? They would just disintegrate. I learned a little bit about language too. We talk in mycology about, we don't say stem, we say stipe. We don't say cap, we say pileus. Well, the same thing goes to a degree with cooking. For example, caramelize, a lot of the recipes that I get would say, caramelize the mushrooms, and you'll see that on the internet for certainly. But caramelization is a reaction of when the carbs and sugar in plant cells are heated. And that's what creates that, yummy brown, that yummy taste and brown color. So it's true of onions, but mushrooms don't experience the caramelization. Mushrooms experience the Maillard reaction, which is a chemical reaction between the amino acids and a sugar. So it's a, kind of a different language, because mushrooms are really very different from plants. I learned that different dried mushrooms take different kinds of rehydration, and definitely different people have different ideas about how that should be done. Some people use boiling water, some people say tap water, some people say long times, others short times. One thing I really learned that was super useful from a cooking perspective is that you don't need to rehydrate in water. You can rehydrate in whatever you might use for cooking down the road. In fact, I have one recipe, turkey roulade with a sous vide porcini. It's brilliant. The author did is he put the dried porcini in a ball jar, like a pint jar filled with heavy cream, and then he put it in the oven. It was like 250 degrees for 4 hours. And when it came out, the porcini was utterly rehydrated, and the cream was just redolent with porcini flavor. And then I learned lots of like kind of miscellaneous info that's just rattling around my head all the time, like stuff like you don't need to peel a puffball, although it's really, really fun to do. And I learned things like dryad saddles are best young. You can grill a maitake and it can take it, no worries. Bluets growing under ornamental pepper trees suck, that's the kind of stuff, but it's helpful. So we launched the website in late September, and by mid-November, I was pretty much getting desperate because there weren't very many recipes up there. So I started loading in my own recipes, lots of stuff with duxelles, for example, like these gyoza that have a duxelle and pork in it. And here, these are a kind of like a pub food. It's a little sausage roll with duxelle and mustard in it. Frankly, it's the ultimate stoner food. But, I was putting my own things in there, and also some recipes from friends. Like this is from Michael Wood, who is an author, and he runs Myco Web, which is a fantastic resource. He's in the Bay Area, and this recipe is really amazing. It's a gorgonzola. It's a farfalle in this case with gorgonzola sauce and black trumpets mixed with black trumpets. It's like 50 shades of mustiness. It's really a wonderful recipe. But so I'm loading up like from my friends and my own, and I started to really like lurk around on Instagram trying to find people who looked like they had good mushroom recipes, and Facebook, and I was in search of good mushroom cooks. I invited every club to join, sort of begging, please share your recipes. And then in early December, the recipes started coming in about every other day, and some were just so awesome. They gave me a lot of confidence about the future of this project. Like these early submissions were wonderful, and all of them are going to be in the book. I started to, as these recipes were coming in, I started to notice pairings, things, for example, mushrooms with onions, garlic, shallots, and leeks. Mushrooms cooked with thyme, and surprisingly rosemary. Lots of mushrooms with rosemary, but I guess maybe that has something to do with the meaty savoriness of mushrooms. Mushrooms with paprika, hot peppers, vinegar, cream, tofu, sour cream, eggs, cheese, noodles. there were lots of recipes that came in using mushrooms in place of meat, like meat that would be in a traditional recipe, like mushroom burgers, mushroom crab cakes. There is one author who is like a master of this. I mean, she produced a lamb tangine with that, utilizing mushrooms, beef pie, this is hers, with mushrooms, chicken yassa, which is a dish from Senegal, with mushrooms, Hungarian stuffed peppers, stuffed with mushrooms. I mean, it goes on. She was like the UN of recipes. And there's lots of recipes where mushrooms augment a known dish, like a shrimp pilaf from northern Greece had mushrooms mixed in it, and it's a natural fit because the recipe also called for these warm spices like cinnamon and nutmeg, and pot roast with mushrooms. That's a pretty obvious a pairing or a combination. Um, there were recipes using medicinal mushrooms, like these chaga chocolate chip cookies, and these strawberries that were poached in a birch polypore syrup. We also got drinks, shrubs and teas and infused vodkas. And this here is a candy cap bourbon and milk punch. And this is, I remember when I first tasted it, for those of you who have had like infants, little babies, you'd finish feeding them and they fall asleep like on the boob or whatever, and their eyes roll up in their heads. That's how I felt after drinking that punch. The recipe's on the website. It's just terrific. There was a certain amount of repeat recipes, like cream soups, for example, which pretty consistently onions, mushrooms, a roux, stock, and cream. So I tend to try the more unusual ones. And I could tell by reading that some would require more development in terms of the writing of the recipe than I could handle time-wise. And that was really sad because, I could imagine that the recipe would taste really good, but for me to be able to break it to achieve what I would think that the writer was trying to achieve would take so much time that it would be I just didn't have the bandwidth to pull it off. And likewise, I didn't want to call people and say, let's talk through your recipe. Let me help you, make it a little easier to follow, because I didn't want to waste their time, basically, because if we ended up doing it and I tasted it and it for whatever reason wasn't a good fit for the book, then I don't know, I just didn't want to go down that road. So I'm sad about it because there's probably plenty of recipes that are on the website that I didn't really that I didn't test because they were hard for me to read. And some were just simply problematic, like this one, which is my recipe. It's a good try. That recipe is beans, maitake, and mussels, but it was just, I don't know, kind of gross. So anyway, there's a little bit of that out there, and some are just simply problematic. Like this recipe was not. It was more of a method. What the fellow did, and is that he recommended that you soak black trumpets in a glass of white wine, and a few hours later drink it, and it's terrific. And I actually kind of liked it, but I thought, well, I know certain bacteria can grow in wine, and so I checked with Ryan and Emily at Mushroom Hunting Foundation, and I was like, what do you guys think? And they said, well, do you think you could cook the trumpet first? This is the raw trumpet the author called for. And I was like, well, I'll ask him. And then I asked David Campbell in California, and David goes, why would you want to screw up a good glass of Chablis? So finally, I reached out to Britt Bunyard, the editor of Fungi Magazine, who's a microbiologist. And, he pretty much could put a kibosh on the whole idea. And he said, look, yeah, you can get food poisoning from doing that. No. So I ended up having to write the author and say, oh, there's a chance someone gets sick, so we can't publish this. And he was really, really nice about it. We also got some canned foods, like pickles. But since I'm not a food scientist with a lab and all that, I couldn't be sure of the safety of their, of the shelf stability, the safety of their shelf stable products. So the ones that I tested that I thought were really good, I just worked with the author to turn them into a refrigerator pickle, which didn't take much work. It's just, you don't can it, you just put it in the fridge instead, and it holds for whatever 10 days at least. There were no fermented mushroom recipes, Tom. I know you're into that. I don't have a single one, but maybe you'll post one. Anyway, some of the recipes were just wacky. Like this oyster mushroom, sweet potato, red pepper kind of composition. It's not even really a dish. It's more like three things that she put together. But I really, I love this. I've just fell in love with this author so much because of her writing. In fact, I have her recipe here because I just have to read it to you. She first of all, for the provenance of the dish, that's what we call the head notes. She said she made this dish to celebrate the last cut of my little movie about mushrooms, Cosmos in a Cup. Think I was mushroomed due to much drinking of lion's mane, so whatever you do, be moderate or not. She's from Split, Croatia. It's a beautiful Venetian style town. But anyway, there's more. So then she has a few notes, and one of them, I'll just read one of them to you. It was additional note: be joyful, relaxed, and slow as you can while you cook. Enjoy the flow. Hence, slow cooking. It's a mindful process, not a quick sex drive. Pardon my French. Observe it, taste your pairing red wine, and go back to have your moment with those royal oysters. And so I just read that stuff and I melt. I think it's so great and so lovely. And there's quite a bit of that in this project. Some of the recipes really stretched my knowledge. I'm an Italian cook, so a recipe like a mushroom tempura, took some practice. Really had to do things a few times to really understand how they worked, and to help the recipe be easy enough for people who might be like me and not adept at that type of that food, that type of cookery. So that I also encountered that with a lot of the Asian cuisine. Like in this case, this is a matsutake mushi, which is like this super delicate steamed soup. You steam it in a kind of teapot, and it's really built to release the aromatics of the matsutake, but the balance is delicate. And so learning and discovering how to the recipe was really good, and I could see exactly what I needed to do to recreate that delicate balance. And then others were just really stretched my budget, because it can get expensive. So, for example, this dish, which is a matsutake doben, and that's like a rice dish. So there's edamame and a type of fish fillet underneath, and then rice below that. Then the whole thing is cooked. I tried that out with the king trumpets first. And other recipes just sort of opened my eyes to mushroom cookery in general, like this, which is what Alan Burgo calls a mushroom confit. but what he's actually doing is kind of pan braising the mushrooms, not unlike the way you do a fillet. So let's say you have a filet mignon, like in the French sort of bistro style. So you have a filet mignon, you sear it in a hot pan, then you put the pan in the oven, hot oven for 6 minutes, you take it out, and then you put a big hunk of butter in there, and then you baste that steak by splashing the butter on it. Maybe the butter is flavored with some herbs and garlic or whatever, and that's how you finish off the meat. You let it rest, and boom. But Alan does that with mushrooms, and it works beautifully. It really, the mushrooms pull the same kind of glazy, buttery quality without being greasy. It's a delightful notion of a pan braise. I also noticed that the recipes were coming from all over the country. And this, I've had like a bunch more since I did this slide. There's lots from California, of course, and a whole lot in this sort of northeastern smile. And, maybe that's because of, rainfall and all that. But and maybe it's population, I don't know, but wow, really from just about every state we've received recipes, and then a few places outside of the United States, like Canada and Thailand. And then the tipping point happened, and I suddenly had enough recipes to imagine a book. So we had a conversation with a publisher, Insight Editions, and put together a deal, and started to and I started to test like on a much more escalated level, like a lot more often, like not just every day, but multiple times during the course of the day. And so far I've tested about 200 recipes. And this is my operating criteria for determining the collection. First, did the recipe work as written? Because I wasn't doing a lot of development on recipe writing. And then, of course, did the recipe have flavor? And because it turned out that lots of recipes were very mild tasting. And I know that kind of reflects what a lot of people's palates are like. But I thought that the book should be more of a hit it out of the park kind of flavor approach. I wanted mushrooms to really just excite the shit out of everybody. So I went for these really high impact kind of dishes, even if they were super subtle, like the matsutake mushi. It was, it's still, it just sang. Then writing the recipe and how much effort it would take on the part of the author. Would they agree with the changes I wanted to make? Sometimes there was one case where an author had put together a recipe that if it wasn't eaten right away, it would dry out pretty quickly. And so I had made a recommendation to him. I said, well, let's turn the cheese into a cheese sauce because then it'll stay soft. And, he wasn't into that. So that was something that I had to, I would have published the recipe if he had agreed to the cheese sauce, because I was worried that people would get pissed off if their dish was dry, if they, had trouble working their Netflix clicker or something, and were taking some extra time before actually eating. In a way, some of the biggest challenges in terms of the criteria have been this balance of dishes. Do I have everything? Do I have enough mushrooms with eggs? Do I have enough appetizer type things? Or do I have enough pastas and meats and mushrooms with fish and desserts and all that stuff, so do I have a balance of dishes so that it really feels like a cookbook, and so that it feels bigger than what I think mushroom cookbooks can feel like, or what mushroom cookbooks people might be perceived as like being one note. I wanted to show some variety, and also a real balance of species. So if I got a recipe that had, cordyceps in it, I was testing it kind of no matter what. I was really excited to have that kind of variability. Um, so there's also the issue of, were the recipes original or, relatively original? No recipe is 100% original, but um, uh, but I couldn't, if somebody, there's plenty of times where people have posted recipes on the website that this is my favorite recipe from this book, and that's fantastic. I mean, it's all great. I'd love to know their favorite quiche recipe. And hell, if Deborah Madison wrote it, awesome. But we can't publish that in the book. So that was something. And then in some cases, authors didn't follow the guidelines that we had put in on the website. Just they had veered so much that I couldn't even try with it. For example, there's this kind of cool recipe for morel chicorrond, which is like a fried morel. But the problem is in lieu of instructions, the author had put up YouTube addresses, and we don't have live links on the website. And of course, you don't have them in the book. So I was like, well, I wrote him. I said, oh, can you please just explain it? And he didn't answer me. So that, didn't go into the book. And the kind of challenges I faced and continue to face, because I'm still working on it, were things like, what's a large onion? What is a handful of fresh trumpets? One bolete per person. I mean, how much is that? Like, this is a bolete and this is a bolete, right? So I had to convert. Most people write recipes using whole foods, 1 leek, for example. But one leek can be quite big. So I had to compile a list of ingredients and their approximate measurements. And so I used that for my guidelines. I also used my own intuition, because in the book, we're using weights and measures. We're not using whole foods except where, like an egg, it's like not going to be that much of a problem. And you can easily say it's standardized, large, extra large, and so on. And, so when it came to testing, I really just had to use my own intuition to estimate what the author wanted when they said 1 leek, for example. 1 leek wouldn't necessarily be a leek this size in a recipe that called for 4 chicken thighs, right? Or it'd be a lot of leek. So, for not every recipe, but many recipes are kind of massaging, my understanding of what the author is hoping to do, is trying to do. And then there's also like the problem of definitions. I just dealt with this. I put this in today because somebody has, actually Irene Lieberman, Gary Linkoff's widow, had sent a recipe for a mushroom and wild onion tart. And I tested it. Delicious. But she calls it a tart. But the pan she called for was a pie plate. So I was like, well, okay, is it a pie? Is it a tart or is it a quiche? And so she and I had like all these sort of discussions, and ultimately used this little graph to help figure out, which I found on the internet, to determine that she was indeed publishing a quiche. So that kind of problem is really typical. I deal with that every day. I also don't always have the pre-blended spices that some people use. Recipes are coming from all over the country, and folks will use, in the South, I see lots of Old Bay and Cajun spices and stuff. So I've had to make them um, rather than go out and buy them because I'm also on a budget. But that's been okay. So, in this slide here, you're looking at Old Bay here and Cajun spice here. And then also there's lots of recipes that call for dried mushrooms that have been ground up. So I have this here is just chaga powder and candy cap powder, but I've got all these different ones that I've made at different times for different recipes. So the publisher, Inside Edition, wanted 100 recipes by spring. So this was the deal that we made in December. So that was 9 months from conception, and they want the material on a rolling schedule, so that includes photographs. So usually for a cookbook, the ones I've done in the past is, I sell the cookbook and I tell them how long I need to do the book. So usually 12 months, sometimes 18 months. And then I figure out all the recipes that are going to be in the collection. And then I give it to the editor. The editor says, this is great, but I want like another sandwich or whatever. So I add that other recipe. Book is like, we know what the table of contents is, then I photograph. We're not doing it that way this time because it's a rolling publication, which I have done before. But there's a lot of challenges when you're doing a cookbook with this many authors, almost 100 authors. Usually, when making this cookbook, when making cookbook, we shoot after, but I'm shooting at different periods for 3 days at a time for a total of 9 days. Each day, 10 recipes. 10 recipes. So that's 90 photographs for a book of 100 recipes. It's kind of an intense schedule, but photographers of cookbooks are pretty used to that. And I also really wanted a super photographer. I felt like a mushroom cookbook, that we wanted to reach a really wider audience, needed a great photographer. So I contacted Evan Sung, who I knew. I had worked with him at the New York Times, and it turns out when I called him, he had just been down to Chile where he was hanging out. He'd met Juliana Furci, who I bet some of you know. And so, he'd just fallen in love with mushrooms and he'd already had COVID. So it was perfect. And he came aboard. He really knows his cookbooks. This is a selection of the cookbooks that he has shot. Anyway, super easygoing and a nice guy. But as I was testing madly, and still am 2-3 recipes a day, sometimes multiple times, I also was taking photographs with my phone of the dishes so that when it came time to shoot them with Evan in my, one of my 3-day sessions, three-day sessions, I'd have an idea of like what looked best. So for example, I take a picture of the dish as a mise en place. I take a picture of the dish kind of in preparation, and then I take a picture of it finished, and then, figure out which one would be the prettiest. Although sometimes a dish was just really good, or I was really hungry, or was just spaced out and tired, that I would eat the dish before I'd taken the picture, as in the case of these really delicious haute la coche crepes, which, by the way, we tried to photograph, but couldn't because it was so evil looking. When you get a close up to a haute la coche crepe, you cut it open, it's like this black evil goo comes out. Tastes amazing, but you know what, not photogenic. So the administration of this book has been super challenging. Here are the steps that I go through after I've tested the recipe and determined, oh yeah, this is going to be good for the book. It meets all those different criteria. My balance of recipes and my balance of mushroom types. Then I write the author, ask them if for permission, and then if they give me a release, we move forward. I format the recipe, which is like putting it into our publishing style. Then I send the recipe to the author, and we go over it usually on the phone. I've spoken to almost every author on the phone, often average for an hour, sometimes much longer, like, especially if I know them, like Eleanor Shavit and I probably talking for, 2.5 hours. I mean, I think I had 2 glasses of wine during the process. It was in the evening, and it can be super inspiring as well. I love this stage of talking with the author. Like, I met this woman, Chris, in Kentucky. She has a recipe for matsutake chicken. I don't know if it's not in this page. And what had happened is she'd seen the movie Fantastic Fungi. She was like, wow, mushrooms are interesting. And so she ordered dried matsutake from not Far West Fungi, North Woods Fungi, I think it's called. Anyway, so she orders these dried matsutake. She never tasted them before. Started experimenting. And it was just such a great story. I mean, I would have never known that if I hadn't talked to her. So for every recipe, I'm trying to talk to the author because I want the head note to be about them and their experience, like how they got into mushrooms or what they care about. For some people, that's really hard. Like, how do you do a short paragraph for Irene Lieberman and Gary Linkoff? How do you do 120 words for Larry Evans? Britt Bunyard, these are people with huge careers in mushrooms that would be interesting for all the readers, but I got 120 words. So I've gotten pretty masterful at like collapsing those big lives into small phrases. But it's a fantastic experience. It's my favorite part. I didn't expect it, but it's been the best and most fulfilling part of this whole thing is just getting to know all these people. I just love it so much. And also I learned stuff about the recipes. Like, that's when I learned that, oh no, the matsutake chicken is supposed to be boned chicken thighs. And I had already photographed it with the chicken thighs on the bone. So this was an ongoing problem of the rolling schedule, because, for example, if you look here, you'll see this squash and mushroom pie has already been photographed, but I haven't gone through with the author's queries about stuff that I might have, misunderstood in the recipe. So it's a little bit like, shit, but we still have to produce, I still have to produce photography and so on. So it's a little risky. So our editor, her name is Vanessa Lopez. She's really easy to work with, just like everybody in this project, like Louie, they're all just sweethearts. What we do is, she and I we sort through the challenges of of a rolling publication. And one that was a really big challenge was how to create chapters, because if you don't know what's going to come in, how do you know, how do you know what the community is going to look like? And the chapters are really just segments of the community. So, we ran through different ways to manage it. Like, how about if we do small plates and large plates? Small plates are often as good as large plates. So that didn't make sense. And what if we did first courses and second courses? And then we realized the Eurocentric point of view was foolish, because we've got an ethnically international book coming in. So finally, that problem was resolved when I just checked with the master, Jane Grigson, and saw how she organized this fantastic book, The Mushroom Feast, and that's what we've done. So the photography, as I mentioned, the plan was 10 recipes a day for 3 days, and 3 shoot periods, right? 9 days altogether. Between the starting in, I think the first shoot was in January. We had another one in February, and we have another coming up in mid-May, and that'll be it. So usually when as I mentioned before, I know everything that I'm going to do. I know the TOC before I'm going to shoot. So the table of contents. So I don't have the unknown, like, is this recipe actually going to make it into the book or not kind of problem. Like I do have a little bit here. Additionally, let me back up. I traditionally do all my own cooking and propping, food styling for my books. But those are my recipes. I know what I'm doing, and it's okay if the same plates show up over and over again. I know what the recipe really is supposed to look like. In the case of this, oh my God, there was, when I do my own recipes, I've got my own kitchen ecosystem. All my food stuff that I need is there, but prepping for these recipes, which are all over the map and need all of these separate individual special things, was a nightmare. I mean, my fridge was impassable. My husband left town, during the 3 days of shooting. He's like, forget it. I can't get milk. Then the storage of all, so the storage of all this stuff, then the propping, I would have to do these little notes to myself so I wouldn't forget, oh yeah, this dish has some boiled potatoes as a suggested side. And don't forget the dill garnish on that dish. And, it was just like kind of keeping track of it all was not so easy. And then the cleanup was problematic too, because I don't have a proper dishwasher. I mean, it's proper, but this is what I have. It's this like little guy that hooks up to the sink, and it takes like 4 hours to wash the dishes, and the dryer doesn't work. So it was really, lots and lots of dirty dishes. But luckily, Evan is marvelously easygoing guy, sweet-natured as could be. And he kind of loved the fact that there weren't a zillion people scrambling around and touching every single little plate and moving every piece of parsley. So the first shoot, these shoots are taking place in my loft where I live in New York City and have lived for many decades. And it was in January, as I mentioned, so there wasn't a lot of fresh product around. And I was really saved by Far West Fungi on the West Coast. They sent me these glorious boxes of fresh mushrooms so that we could not only for preparing the dishes, but also so that we could shoot them. And then my gals here, Pam Krause, who was my editor at Clarkson Potter for many years, and Nenny Panergia, who's contributed to the book and is a fantastic home cook. So these two ladies did all kinds of help for me, washing dishes, prepping dishes that we were going to shoot. I could ask Pam, can you get me a soft-boiled egg in 20 minutes for a picture? And she would in 20 minutes produce the most beautiful little soft-boiled egg on a towel. I mean, between the two of them, they have like 100 years of experience. They're all covered with burns and stuff. They're just goddesses. They were fantastically helpful. And then when it came to propping, I was lucky that this old friend of mine from college, she has a magnificent store in Soho called Global Table. She gives me a lot of her chip stuff. I have tons of Global Table goods. But she lent me boxes of things in order to prep these dishes, because as I said, I mean, I've always used my own stuff when I was propping my other cookbooks, but I didn't want to use my own stuff exclusively for this book. I wanted each individual recipe to feel like its own thing, to have its own props and its own look and its own dishes. And I didn't want to reuse anything. I mean, I reused some forks and stuff, but in general, I did not reuse anything. So the challenge was get enough props without going broke. And then Natalie helped with that by lending. And then creating and then through its styling, try to create a look that was consistent from photo to photo so that the overall book felt like one, but also felt sort of elegant and kind of high end. I wanted them to look really professional. And food photography is very challenging. It's a kind of porno. It really is. I mean, and it's like, just like something can be very unsexy, it can also be very sexy. But finding that place, that balance is super hard. For me, there's a point of time, and you'll see them in other pictures, where for me, I look at the dish, and at that point, I just want to eat it. I want to put my hands on it. I want to lick the bowl. And then I know we've sort of hit that sweet spot. But not all dishes like to be photographed. Risotto, very hard to photograph, very hard to make look anything but kind of mushy. And any chunky cream sauce just kind of looks a little vomitous. Very hard to pull off. And some things were just hard for me to cook. Like I made this friggin' tortilla. This is a mushroom potato tortilla. I must have made it 3 times. I was just could not pull it off that day. It was just so frustrating. Eventually we did, as you can see from the photo. And then other challenges, were like, how do I prop for a proper Japanese display? Just kind of learning about dishware and trying to reflect the ethnicity of the food was always a learning curve for me. And then, of course, there's the challenge of shooting dishes where you can't really see the mushrooms. In this case, this is a creamed egg and mushroom dish. So creamed eggs is a hard-boiled eggs that are in a bechamel with mushrooms. It's a really classic American dish. There's some biscuits and stuff, but you can't really see the mushrooms. Ugh, so we struggled over stuff like this. This is a delicious black bean and huitlacoche soup. But, who can see the huitlacoche? It's black, right? And then these are from Jack Zernacki, who's a wonderful mushroom chef who lives in the Willamette Valley. These are Brussels sprouts with truffle oil and pea shoots, and Brussels sprouts with truffle butter and chopped toasted hazelnuts. So it's like, I guess I could have put the oil and butter on the background too, but the bottom line is they're kind of, not every dish illustrates the mushroom well. And during shoots, the kitchen situation was pretty grueling. So as the day progressed, I'd start losing stuff like the peppermill, would go missing for a couple of dishes, or I'd forget to put the potatoes on the dish, or I would have trouble like remembering, something has to go in the oven because it's going to take a whole of 40 minutes. So I had to make these like timed out recipe lists to know what I was going to cook when. So, that was just so I could manage the oven and stovetops. And models in the COVID era, not so easy. Mainly, we just have the hands of a couple of 60-something-year-old white women. So we recruited my son and his friends in order to, to switch it up, because this is a community cookbook. We want and need to represent as many people as we can, just as we represent as many mushrooms as we can. I learned not to send photos to the authors ahead of time, because I have to balance the author's approach with the needs of the photograph. So for example, I sent this photograph to the author because I was so thrilled with it. And she was like, that's not enough parsley. She kind of puts, the recipe calls for a lot of parsley, but I was like, well, I need to see the mushrooms. And in this case, the matsutake mushi, doben mushi, is I had put this little container of hot pepper, Japanese hot pepper on it, and then I showed it to the author. His name is Langdon Cook. He writes wonderful books. He wrote one called The Mushroom Hunter, which I highly recommend. And he said, I don't think so. No hot pepper. He goes, I got to check with the Japanese chef who gave me the recipe. And I was like on tenterhooks thinking, oh my God, I'm gonna have to reshoot this. But we got permission. They said, it's okay. Just don't mention it in the recipe. In this case, this is a delicious the spaghetti alla vongole with hericium. And the author goes like this. She goes, where is the hericium? So I really learned, that it's the mushroom that's the star. Keep that in mind. And it's something that I would sometimes forget. I mean, it was a challenge in the sort of whirl of putting together the pictures. So I started out with pretty standard stuff, process shots like this, basic setups. This is Brit's chicken thighs with sherry and a stick of butter and morels, and here this is that a crab and red pepper bisque with cordyceps. You see them, cordyceps mushrooms. So these are pretty basic kind of setups and shots. I had to do all kinds of little shots. I continue, of course, I'm only 2/3 the way through. I had to do all kinds of little shots that would be useful to the art director, stuff they can stick in, like this little collection of spices and various mushrooms. But then by the second shoot that we did in February, I started to get, I think, a little better at it, to sort of be more creative. So we did things like a mise en place. We did, I started to think about props differently. So this mise en place is for stuffed morels. Look at the size of the morels I have for this. They were incredible. They were just monsters. And this is a mushroom strudel. So, thinking a little bit differently about props, what kind of props I could use and how I could use them. And then I also kind of opened up and started to trust Evan to do some, to do more compositional work. And Natalie at Global Table, like she told me, oh, you're going to love these dishes. Your photographer is going to love these dishes because they're matte. And I was like, blue and green. It's not very mushroomy. She said, take them. And I did. And he went crazy. So this, which is the shrimp pilaf with mushrooms, then cinnamon and nutmeg I mentioned earlier, it's Northern Greek. This photograph is done by Natalie of Global Table and Evan Sung. And I think it's gorgeous. And I also started to think a little differently about how to look at something. Like this is a candied jelly ear, so it's kind of fun to see it up against held up against a white wall. And these are maitake that are getting ready to go into the oven, and here this is Larry Evans' brie that he filled with morel mushrooms that he then bakes in a pastry, like puff pastry, like Pepperidge Farm type puff pastry from the supermarket. And so we tried something a little more graphic. And I even tried some risky stuff, which probably some of which won't show up in the book. For example, this is a vodka, a chanterelle flavored vodka, which was actually pretty awful when it was room temp, but once it was cold, it was kind of great, sort of like a schnapps. And I put the cigarette in the background, which, so we took pictures without the cigarette too. I did things like a dirt background. This is some soil and I used as a background for this dish, which is a pork tenderloin with apricot, with a chanterelle apricot sauce. And then at one point, my daughter said, these pictures are beautiful, but the truth is I usually eat, standing at the counter from the pot. And so that made me think, well, what do I do? I actually regularly eat, in front of the television. My husband and I set up, we have a little table. We watch one of the shows of the whatever series we're watching at the time and have a dinner. So this dish, which is from a woman named Dorothy Carpenter, is a very old-fashioned sherried plurettes on toast, right? It's a real, like, ladies, I'm eating by myself tonight. So we kind of did this setup. I just thought, let's do it in front of the TV. You don't see that very often, but I thought it was kind of a cool idea. So we set her up with a martini and the computer with a movie on it. And at first I thought, oh, I'll put Fantastic Fungi on there. And I just thought that was too cheesy. I couldn't do it. So I put up the French Connection. I thought that was kind of cool. And this is my pièce de résistance. This is Jane's Candy Cat Punch, which I mentioned earlier, with some Xanax on it. I guarantee that this picture will not appear in the book, but I'm very happy to be able to share it with you. And always, the pressure of a book is the cover. Do we go traditional, which of course the sales team prefers, or do we go radical, something like this, which I always kind of tend toward, or do we try to find something in between? And the title is always a constant issue when you're putting out a book. The sales teams and marketing teams, they have their reasons for wanting certain things. And then the artistic end of stuff, editorial has our reasons. So you have to kind of negotiate a balance. For example, the sales team wants to call this the official Fantastic Fungi book because the company, Inside Editions, is used to selling books that are associated with movies, like, like Star Wars books, like, say, Obi-Wan Kenobi Guide to Relationships or something. And so they'll say the official Obi-Wan Kenobi, so that there's not that kind of brand piggybacking that can happen. I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but there was this book called 50 Shades of Chicken, which was a cookbook that did a little brand piggybacking on the very successful novels. Anyway, they also wanted to throw in, but I didn't want the official Fantastic Fungi thing because I really feel like, the movie kind of brought a bunch of people together, but the book is bigger than that because it's a true expression. It's the community expressing themselves in the kitchen. And also, I just, didn't think there would be that much like brand piggybacking for the Fantastic Fungi movie. I mean, that's just me. They also wanted to, they recommended that we put stuff, that we throw in stuff on trend kind of stuff that would, like about mushrooms for health, search engine optimization type words. But that's, not what we're doing. I know that right now, mushrooms for health is super, super trendy and will sell books, but I spent hundreds of dollars on butter in this book, testing this book. It's just doesn't make sense to promote it as like about mushrooms for health. So this is the kind of debate that goes on. It's what happens when you're working on a book. It's happened to all my books that I've done, just me as the author, and here as the representative of all the other authors. We're still doing that same, give and take and trying to land on the right title and cover. So we ended up with this for now. This is the holding cover for the catalog. It's not the permanent cover. We are definitely going to do something that really shows mushrooms. It's kind of hard to see in this dish, but it'll give you a general idea. of what it's going to look like and what our kind of goal is. So we're still working on this book. It's I have to deliver the last of everything in mid-May. Not the last of everything. I have to do the writing stuff, the intro, conclusion. They want some essays, and then there's all the flat matter and stuff. So I have the rest of May to finish that. But the recipes and the photographs by mid-May. And then the book is supposed to come out in October. So I have to say that every book is a learning process. This one has been fantastically educational because I've had 100 teachers. I've learned a lot about cooking mushrooms and the variety of tastes and how they can be complemented, like chanterelles and apricots or hericium and fish. I've learned a ton about the ability of mushrooms to withstand heat. Remember that dish of the enoki soup? It had miso. It was a miso soup with enoki mushrooms in it and tofu. I can go back and show you again, but I made that dish with, enoki are like little nails, right? And then I had some left over. And the next day I threw in some clams and I had some clam broth, and I recooked the dish again. And I thought for sure that enoki was going to be like a limp noodle. No, that enoki had the same mouthfeel, the same bite that it did, in its earlier incarnation. So that was like a huge realization that the likely because of the chitin, cell walls that fungi are made of, that mushrooms are made of, and fungi, they really can take a lot of heat and will retain their integrity. I learned about their easy substitution for meat in recipes, and how cooking meat can actually inform cooking mushrooms. Through these recipes, I came to understand that what I knew about cooking meat could actually make me a better mushroom cook. And I learned to love the cultivated varieties. I used to be a little bit of a snob about that, but no, there are lots and lots of fantastic recipes using cultivated mushrooms in this book. And what the real takeaway here is it's not the mushroom, it's the cook. And I also learned how much easier it is to get a good night's sleep on a belly full of mushrooms than on just about anything else, because I have eaten them almost every night for the last 6 months. But most of all, I knew there were many terrific cooks in our community of mycophiles. But it has been so great getting to know some of them and to incorporate them into my life through their recipes. So I'm really, really looking forward to when we get to dine together again, when we can drink wine, eat mushrooms, and as my friend David Campbell says, breathe all over each other. So thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Eugenia. I guess I would have 2 comments. Sauteing mushrooms will never be the same again. And the second comment would be, you never know how difficult it is to do something until you dig into the details.
That's the
And
truth.
the details of putting together a cookbook, I think we've all been shown how complicated and involved and intense that can be. Probably, I certainly did not appreciate that. So, Elizabeth, do we have any burning questions in the chat room that we need to cover? We're running on the late side, and I'm not sure.
A few fun ingredient questions that I'll let people wait and see when the cookbook comes out, and see if those ingredients made it in. But one person did mention the West Virginia foray, and I'll just bring that up as one of our local culinary events. So there's a weekend-long foray out in the Canaan Valley. And Chip Chase and his team from the Whitegrass Lodge, which is a cross-country ski resort out there, always cater a big dinner for that event. So someone asked if we had made it into the cookbook, but I also just want to recommend that whole weekend foray to folks to keep their eye out for whenever that one gets up and running again, to really experience lots of different mushroom dishes in one event. It's a fun one.
So I'm going to go ahead and sign off for Mycological Association. It's our witching hour and a little bit past. Again, thank you kindly very much for the instructive view of how a mushroom cookbook is meant to be. And we all look forward to when it comes out in September. And thank you kindly for your presentation. And to everybody else, happy mushroom hunting. Hopefully Mitch's Morel foray will go better this weekend, and we will all be out there together before we know. So without any further ado, I'm going to say good night to you all, and to all a good night.
Thank you.